Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. In this video, I have another project to help you tackle your pile of selvage edges. It is a cute little selvage edge fabric storage bin. This is a very simple design and super fun to make, so let's jump in. Okay, here's what we are working with today in order to make a little scrappy selvage edge bin. And all of these measurements are in the description box below this video, so you can click in there to snag them. For the inside of the bin, I have 4 pieces of fabric that are 5 inches wide and 7 inches tall, and 1 piece of fabric that's 5 by 5. This is going to be the bottom of the inside, and these are going to be the sides of the inside. I have that same amount in cotton batting. So 1 is 5 by 5, and then I have 4 pieces that are 5 by 7. And of course, I have a whole bunch of selvage edges and long, thin scraps of fabric, sometimes called strings, that will make the outer layer. The very first step is to pick one of your selvage edges to start with, and you are going to want to sew it from corner to corner, sewing diagonally across one of your long pieces of cotton batting, or your 5 by 7 pieces. And I have a wide piece here, but you can definitely use skinny pieces. Just mix and match, do whatever works for you. Over at the machine, I am going to sew from this corner all the way down to the other corner, and I'm going to try to sew a nice straight line. And I bumped up my stitch length to 5 millimeters, so that's the longest stitch length I can do on my machine. I'm just going to sew straight down. Since this piece is so wide, I'm going to add a couple more rows of stitches to hold it in place. Okay, the first selvage edge is stitched onto my cotton batting. So now I'm going to pick the next piece, and I'm going to pick a skinnier piece this time, and I'm going to sew it right side together on top of my first selvage edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to sew straight down. Once it's sewn on, I'm just going to finger press it and sew 1 row of stitching on top of this second skinny selvage edge. So I've added another row of stitching on top of this selvage edge, and now I'm ready to add more. I'm going to keep adding more selvage edges onto this cotton batting until it's totally covered. So I'll be right back. All right, I have my first piece of cotton batting totally covered with selvage edges. So I'm going to flip it over and trim it back to its original size. Now, I'm going to use a quilting ruler because it makes it easier, but you definitely could just use your scissors, and you want to get it back to 5 by 7. This is always so satisfying, except when that happens. And of course, I'm going to save these other scraps for a future project. I think there's a big chunk of thread right there. Anyhow, saving these for future projects, and I'll probably, sometimes they just pull apart because I sewed them with such a long stitch length. So let's just add these back to the pile and keep trimming this back to size. Okay, my first panel is done. So what I'm going to do next is go through these same steps with all of my other pieces of cotton batting. So I'm going to be attaching selvage edges. I'm going to be going from corner to corner to create a nice diagonal. It's going to take me a minute, so I'm going to put on a little Netflix and get through these, and then I'll be right back. Okay, my 5 pieces are all sewn up, and I gave them a little press at the iron also. What I'm going to do next is sew them together with the right sides facing, and I'm gonna sew them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm gonna stop my seam a 1/2 inch away from the bottom corner so that we can join all of these pieces with the bottom piece in an upcoming step. So I'm gonna stitch from the top to 1/2 inch away from this corner. And I do wanna make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end of this row of stitches. The first two are sewn together, and now it's time to add a third rectangle onto one of the ends and just go through that same step. I'm going to sew all 4 of these together in a long line. All right, all 4 of these rectangles are joined, and they all have a little 1/2 inch opening here at the bottom. So now we can add the bottom panel. I'm going to sew one edge of the bottom panel onto one edge of one of these center panels. It doesn't really matter which one you do. And I'm going to sew from seam to seam. So I should have used contrasting thread. You can't quite tell, but I'm going to sew from about a 1/2 inch away from this edge, right starting on this seam, all the way over to the other seam, which is about a 1/2 inch away from this edge. All right, it looks like this, and you can see that this edge is loose here on both sides. So now I'm going to bring together these last 2, the rectangles on the 2 ends, and join them so that now we have like a full circle or loop kind of look. And once again, I'm going to stop my seam a 1/2 inch away from the bottom corner. Okay, now I have a box or a full circle of panels here. So now I'm going to sew the bottom panel onto the opposite end here. Again, I'm going to sew from seam to seam, and then I'm going to sew it onto this side from seam to seam, and finally onto one last side. So I will be right back. Okay, I'm going through all the same steps now with my liner fabric, and I just want to show you a close-up of how I sew these the bottom edge on. So when I'm attaching the last parts of the bottom edge, what I like to do is pull open the sides so that I make sure I don't catch any extra fabric in that seam. And then just make sure these 2 edges are lined up, and I'm going to sew from seam to seam, and I'm going to make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. You can kind of feel and make sure that this other side is out of the way of your stitches. And it looks like that. All right, I have my 2 little boxes sewn up, and we are almost done. I'm going to turn my liner fabric right side out and push out those corners. I don't think I need my handy dandy chopstick for that. I'm going to put the inside into the outer layers, and I'm going to line up the seams on the side. And it's kind of nice to open up the side seams just to cut down on a little bit of the bulk. If you wanted to trim your seam allowance on the outer fabric, you totally could. I'm leaving it intact because it actually gives a little more structure to the bin. So I kind of like it like that. But it does leave a bit of bulk in the bin. So do what works for you. I'm leaving them intact, and I'm opening up those side seams, and I'm gonna just pin all along the 4 corners here. So I will be back. All right, my corners are pinned. So now I am bringing my bin to the machine, and I'm gonna stitch along this top edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but I want to make sure to leave an opening of about 3 inches so I can turn this whole thing right side out. So I'm just going to start here. I'm going to make sure to back stitch. And then I'm going to go all the way around, but leave that opening before I close up this whole top. All right, once again, it is time for the grand reveal. I do want to mention again, if you want to trim this seam allowance off the top edge, you can, and I'm going to leave it in place. Okay, let's check this puppy out, shall we? Probably could have left the opening even a little bit larger, but I don't know, it's easier this way. It's less folding to do at the end when I top stitch. I finished birthing the bag, as somebody said in one of my comments. I think that's a nice way to describe it. And I got my handy dandy chopstick out because it is nice to push out these corners really well with the chopstick. I don't know if you can hear the rain, but I am in Northern California. We are having another atmospheric river of weather out here. So I am in my cozy sewing studio making a fun little bag. Brighten up this stormy day. Okay, so it looks like this. What I'm gonna do is push the liner fabric into the outer fabric, and then I want to press this top edge really well with the iron, especially the opening that we left. Make sure it's lined up nicely, and top stitch. So I'm gonna do those things and be right back. It's already so cute. I love it. I love it so much. Okay, I'll be right back. It's done. It is so cute. I made it this tall so that if I want it to fold over the top edge and have a little pop of that liner fabric, you can do that and still have a decent amount of storage. Hey, if you're looking for another project to do with your selvage edges, I'm going to link to another video right here. And if you want to learn more about becoming a No Trace channel member, just click on the join button below this video.